Now we'll move on to Lauren. Where's Lauren Weaver? There she is down at the bottom there.
Hi, can you guys hear me now? Good.
Yes, thank you.
All right, let me get some things set up real quick. All right, are you guys seeing my presentation?
You see it?
Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon. Valerie, thank you for that presentation. You're always a hard presenter to follow, and I like that. That's good. I'm looking forward to seeing where the open space work goes, for sure. But let's move on to infographics now. So we've been working on curating infographics and are excited to bring this content to you today. Let's start with a little bit of context and look at the purpose of this project, some of the science behind the data, and how this content can be accessed. So some of the goals that we had in pursuing this work are to understand our community by looking at objective information about our community with the greater context of the various areas. We can gain a greater understanding. We can monitor change by reviewing the information you are about to see periodically, especially. That will enable us to detect changes and then adjust to the needs of a growing community. We can use this information to measure the comprehensive plan. The plan covers a lot of important content, and so these can help us to understand where we're at and where we're trying to go. Data is just data until it's contextualized, and then it can be considered knowledge closer to that. And then ideally that knowledge fuels action. So this is a step in that direction. We can compare areas of various scales and geographies to gain constructive insights. And then policy with a strong foundation in the reality of our community has greater positive impact. So those are just some of the goals that we had in mind as we were embarking upon this. All right, this might be the most boring slide of this whole presentation, but it's also very important. So if you have any interest in geographic data science, pay attention, even if it's boring. So these infographics were created using Community Analyst. That's a software as a service that's available via the site license agreement that's managed by our stellar LFUCG GIS team. The data apportionment algorithm used for these infographics essentially determines how much of each variable is appropriate to proportionally assign to a polygonal area, and then it redistributes the demographic, business, economic, and landscape variables accordingly. Some really important considerations anytime you're looking at data are to consider the orientation. So when evaluating huge amounts of data, which we have now in the 21st century, considering a goal like, for example, internet access in areas with school-aged children, and then evaluating the available data for content that can inform a growing knowledge of the subject leads to better positive action. At the same time, it's really important to be aware of our biases. It's critical that we evaluate those and consider how those are influencing how we interpret the data, and then take measures to influence the impact of those biases for better outcomes. Data sources. Data can only be as good as the sources that provide the content. One of the things that I'm providing to you guys today is a document that details where each piece of information is coming from, so you can evaluate that on your own time in more detail. The scale of geographic areas is really important. Today we're going to look at data from various scales, moving from Kentucky all the way down to council districts. So determining the scale at which you want to evaluate data for whatever your goal is really important to understanding it. There's this thing that geographers like to talk about called the modifiable area unit problem. It's essentially that where we draw the lines matters. It can really influence the meaning of the data. An example that I like is if you think of a neighborhood and drawing a line around the neighborhood, you can then calculate a population density. But if you draw the line around the neighborhood and the commercial area next to it, that population density changes. And that can really influence what we're taking away from it. It's critical to have a representative sample. That's the only way to have valid data. So for example, if you ask residents to complete a survey about their neighborhood, but only the individuals under a certain age complete the survey, that data is not representative of the resident experience in that neighborhood. And that applies to all data. So thinking about what is representative for what you're trying to understand better is critical. And that said, all data is an approximation. It's dependent on the collection methods, it's dependent on the preparation, it's dependent on the representative sample, and so much more. I hear people from time to time discredit data because it's an approximation. That's a fallacy, because statisticians and demographers and people who are trained in data are using well-tested and reviewed methods, and certainly doing a better job of approximating than my single human brain can do. So we have to consider if the approximation is accurate to what we're trying to understand, but also accept that all we can do as humans is approximate in everything, really. So all of these considerations and more are important to keep in your minds as we move forward and contextualize the huge amount of data we're about to look at. So methods of access. Right now, you can access this on Google Drive. It was sent to council members this week. And then soon we're going to have it uploaded on the Imagine Lexington website as well, so other people can access and use it. Okay, data exploration. This is my favorite part. Let's see if my laser's ready. Can you guys see that red laser on my screen? Awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and dig in. Here we see an example of the infographic page. A page matching this one has been generated for Kentucky, Fayette County, the urban service area, the rural service area, and each of the council districts. And that's all available at that shortened bit.ly link. Content is organized conceptually by columns. We have demographics, employment, income, housing, utilities, and transit. And there's a lot of data here. There's 16 different pages of rich content. So we're going to take a look at some of those individual infographics for different scales and geographic areas. And my hope is that coming out of this presentation, you guys have like your feet a little bit in the water. I guess your toes in the water is the phrase. So you can look at it on your own for what your own goals are and the interests that you have. Okay, so let's talk about population pyramids a little bit. Population pyramids, also called age-gender pyramids, are really powerful visualizations of a population that show the gender and age distribution of a population. So on the left here, we have males, and on the right, we have females. This is further broken down along the y-axis by age group, different age ranges. And then on the bottom, the x-axis represents the percentage of the population that falls into each of those categories. So it's a lot of information, really cool, but it can kind of be a lot to process. So if you're kind of glazing over right now, Google population pyramids, it'll be great. You'll learn so much. So things often become clearer for better and for worse when we compare them. Let's look at Kentucky and Fayette County side by side. So first, let's note that the x-axes are different, with Kentucky's highest bar under 8%, whereas Fayette's highest bar is under 10%. Now, comparing the two, we can observe that Kentucky has what is often called a stationary population, and that it's relatively homogeneous until we approach the 70s. Fayette County has what might be called a constrictive or a contracting pyramid, with more of a narrowing at the bottom. Here in Fayette, we have a higher number of people in the 20 to 39 age ranges, which makes sense considering our student population and our young professional population. These pyramids and those on the infographic pages for council districts are really, really interesting to look at. I'd recommend opening up the combined PDF that you can download from Google Drive, like picking an infographic like population pyramid that you want to look at, and then scrolling through each page, and then you can get a better idea of the character of the populations. UK's population is really interesting. So Council District 3, I think, will help put things into context really well. Okay, so moving on, let's look at educational attainment. So Kentucky's highest categories for educational attainment are high school diploma and some college or no degree. Whereas in Fayette County, the highest are bachelor's degree and a graduate or professional degree. This points to the importance of retaining our young professionals. They're often paid well, they pay more in taxes, alongside other economic investments that they are able to make, and that supports the population. Okay, let's go to employment, and we'll take a look at the urban service area. So our population is majority white collar, which includes industries and occupations such as business, financial, architecture, engineering, healthcare practitioner, office, administrative, farm manager, and more. The blue collar category includes production, construction, maintenance, and more. And the services category includes things like food preparation and grounds and more. There are a lot of different variables that are aggregated for this. This tiny, hard to read link right here, if you click on it later, you can see the full breakdown of what variables are included if you like. The unemployment rate right now is quite high. It's at 18%. This is an estimate from Esri for 2020. So this is not for previous years. They have a team of statisticians and demographers that try to update data to the best of their ability. So this is a really important figure to keep in mind as we continue to face the pandemic and remain compassionate human beings, recognize our privilege, and try to help each other. Okay, I think I'm talking too fast. Maybe I should slow down. How am I doing on time? No, I should keep going fast because I have 30 minutes. Okay, let's take a look at the urban and rural service areas. It's probably not surprising to any of us that our rural areas, unlike most of Kentucky's, have a higher concentration of wealth on average. And there's a lot of value in that, numerous reasons why that's not a bad thing. That said, there are certainly areas within the urban service area with more affluence than the rural service area. So it's the average of things that kind of shifts the data. And that's where things like the modifiable area unit problem come into mind and choosing the appropriate scale for what you're looking at. Let's see. Moreover, the poverty level in the urban service area is about 1 in 5 households, compared to about 1 in 20 households in the rural service area, which is good. So if you think about it, in a room of 20 random representative Lexington households that live in the urban service area, 4 of those 20 are below the poverty level. To put that into context a little bit better, in a household of 3 people, the federal poverty guideline is $21,720 as of January 2020 for 3 people. I can't imagine living with that just by myself. I consider myself very privileged in that regard. So this information and context has really important implications for decisions, especially right now with an urban service area that we just saw of 18%. Okay, let's look at something we're probably all really interested in, which is owner and renter occupancy and housing affordability. So first and foremost, the owner and renter occupancy data is the most outdated on these pages. It's also the best available that I've been able to find from open to new sources, if anybody has them. It is directly sourced from the 2010 census. So it'll be neat to have the 2020 data and be able to compare how much Lexington has changed in 10 years. This donut is configured so that green is always owner occupied, blue is always renter occupied, and the variable with the highest count is on the top. So about 55% of the urban service area residences are owner occupied and about 45% are renter occupied. So let's take a look at the council districts. Briefly, in this little tiny box here, I'm just going to flip through it and think about how those top colors change and also how the proportions change. Okay, so that's really interesting. I think this points really well to the importance, again, of representative data, especially in feedback in our development processes. All people are people. They all have opinions and they all want to live in places that make their lives enjoyable, help them raise their children, grow a garden, take walks to places. Moving on, an important topic for our Lexington community is housing affordability. I think these charts are really, really interesting. So financial advisors generally recommend that one's housing costs are 30% or less of their income. Above 30%, financial stability gets really challenging. And we know financial stability is so important for so many reasons. So in this chart, the color blue here on the bottom indicates housing costs that are financially stable, and the red indicates housing costs that are not financially stable. So we see mostly like a bell curve with a little tail here for owner occupancy. So based on this, and this is coming from 2018 5-year American Community Survey data, so it's pretty good data. 20% of owners in the urban service area have housing costs that are not financially stable. Meanwhile, if we look at renters, we find that 46%, or almost half of renters have housing costs that are not financially stable. Even more concerning, 25% of renters have housing costs that are 50% or more of their income. So imagine taking like half of each of your checks and it all goes to housing. That's a problem. Moreover, this pattern is consistent across all the council districts, all of them. The most wealthy, the most poor, they all have this trend of renters paying more than is financially stable and higher rates, especially of that 50% or more category. So this is important to keep in mind as we look at solutions for the future and evaluate how we can get there. All right, utilities. Another way of looking at the data is to compare a council district, for example, to the county as a whole. So Council District 1 includes part of the north side of Lexington's urban service area. In Fayette County, average annual household utility costs are around $4,500 per year. And for District 1, they're about $2,800 per year. These cost estimates come from consumer expenditure surveys and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they include things like natural gas, electricity, fuel oil, bottled gas, coal, wood, other fuel, phone services, water, other public services, trash and garbage collection, and septic tank cleaning. I don't know how many septic tanks we have, probably more in the rural service area. So I don't know why there's such a difference in these. This is one of the areas that I'm curious to investigate further about why that might be. Maybe it's a centrality thing. Maybe it's a more complex thing than that. Okay, methods for internet access are also really interesting. Let's just focus on via computer. So in Fayette County, 74% of the population accesses internet via a computer, compared to only 55% in District 1. So this is really important right now, especially when we consider how to ensure access for education. So I looked at it, and roughly 20% of District 1's population is between the ages of 5 and 19. So they're in school, hopefully. It's really important for a healthy and productive society that access to education is an option for everybody. I'm not an education expert. My mother is a special ed teacher, but I don't know much. But I can't imagine thriving in a telework environment, even as an adult professional, without a computer. So this is important. Okay, our final category is transit. For this one, I thought it might be interesting to look at a couple of unique districts in comparison to the urban service area. So here we have the urban service area. And then we have Council District 3, which is the UK vicinity. So it's really unique given that. And then we also have Council District 6, which is a slice between New Circle and I-75 that includes part of the North End and the Liberty Road area that's been developing over the last time. So let's look at vehicle ownership first. So here we see that 2% of owner-occupied houses have vehicles, or rather are without vehicles, and 15% of renter-occupied houses are without vehicles. I was pretty surprised to see that this was the same for Council District 3. I double checked, and it is, at least according to the 2018 5-year American Community Survey data. Council District 6, though, also surprised me, but in a different way. So for renter-occupied housing units, almost a quarter of households are without vehicles. This is really interesting when we look at where they're located and think about continuity and connectivity to that area. I think it'd be really interesting to look at this area more closely and see how many households, for example, are within proximity of multimodal transit opportunities. Last year, I decided actually to do an experiment, definitely against my better judgment, and I attempted a bike ride from my home near downtown to my friend's house over here. They live off Liberty Road. It was one of the most dangerous bicycle rides of my life. And I'm like an assertive cyclist. So that's good to know as far as like where we might want to be thinking about improvements. I think there is a plan for that area already, but I hope it doesn't get held up. So let's look at how the current population is using transportation. In the urban service area, about 2% of the population uses public transportation, about 9% carpools, about 4% walk, and not even 1% bicycle, which kind of breaks my heart, but it's cool. It isn't surprising to see that in District 3, the UK vicinity, many more people walk at about 23%, and bicycle at almost 3%. Meanwhile, in District 6, where almost a quarter of households do not have vehicles, less people use public transit, carpool, walk, and bicycle than the urban service area. So what's going on here? I don't know. This is also another area that I'm curious to explore more. If a quarter of the folks who live there don't have vehicles and they also aren't able to use these multimodal transportation options, how are they being limited in access and opportunities? All right, so that's each category. That concludes our data exploration. I just gave you guys a lot of information. Like I said, you have access to all of this content, and I encourage you to look more deeply at it on your own time. So let's just talk about next steps. So we want to make this content available online via the Imagine Lexington website. We need to schedule periodic updates. And we're working right now on determining what the best schedule is for those updates. Certainly the 2020 census results will be an important revision, especially when we look at information like renter and owner occupied households. We want to support requests from council members and other parties. Like we mentioned, the council members have received this information and they're parsing through it. And we want to evaluate data for smaller geographic areas. Like I think it could be really interesting to see what the 500-foot notification buffer for a zone change request is, for example, and how that might help us gain a better awareness of that area and determine if we are receiving representative input from citizens. Keeping in mind that that representative component is really important. And then we're excited moving forward to look more closely at developing metrics specific to the themes of the comprehensive plan. So that's going to be really cool. So more coming soon, and I'm exploring another format for that might be a little more interactive too. So yeah, we just looked at a lot of information. Even me right now presenting this information, I'm still processing all of the context and implications of the data. I found it was really helpful to print it. I'm not a big printer, partially because I'm a space cadet and I lose printed things. But if you have access to a printer, it's really helpful to be able to like lay them all out and see them next to each other. And then you're welcome to reach out to myself or Chris Woodall or anybody in planning with any questions that you have. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm glad to try to address any questions you have at this point.
Questions for Lauren?
I'll provide a comment. Thank you very much. That was very nice. You know, being in real estate, it doesn't surprise me at all that you showed that 50% of renters were spending more on their housing than owners. I was a little surprised that the 20% number on owners was as high as it is, but it's always kind of been interesting being in the business for 30 years that they'll only let you spend a certain amount of your income on your mortgage, but in the rental pool, you can spend 100% of it if you want.
Mm-hmm.
The number of, first-time buyers or people coming from rentals that walk into any real estate firm and say, that they're spending, $2,500 a month in rent, and they want to do that and buy a house, and they can't afford it. They can't come anywhere close. So that was right on the market, I think. The other area I was kind of curious about is you showed some, I guess it was income per household based on out in the rural area versus in town. And I was kind of curious if there was any data that you have that shows like income per acre of space, comparing those in terms of the usage of space being occupied.
That'd be really
based on density.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I do not have that. But one thing that I think is really, really great about this format of data is that big, boring geographic word about like spatial appropriation means that we can run it on different geographic areas. And then there's a bunch more information that can be pulled and integrated. So I think that'd be a really interesting thing to look at.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I've got a question about that utilities slide.
Sure.
I think you said the average utilities comes out to about $380 per month in Fayette County. Okay, utilities, when it says fuel, does that mean fuel used for heating your house? Or is that fuel for a vehicle? Because this seems high, because I think the numbers are actually lower than that. So please let me know what's included in the utilities cost.
Sure. And I was just looking, I thought I had put a link on here, but I didn't. So let me make a note. Before I share these slides, I'll add a link there that shows what all of the variables are for utilities. And I think that might offer more insight. I'm also curious about this utilities data. So I'm not necessarily going to have the best answer for you on this, but what I can say is that this is aggregating a lot of information ranging from things like electricity and fuel to even phone services. So I think that could be something that helps explain what these costs are. So if phone is considered in part of that, that might also explain why certain districts have higher utilities costs than others, in addition to like transit. So if you're considering fuel for like vehicles, for example, if you're driving further, that's going to cost you more. But this is a complex one. This is maybe one of the most complex variables. But I'll drop a link in there, and then I want to encourage you to poke around and see if that answers your questions. And if it doesn't, please reach out to me and we can look at it more closely together.
Absolutely. And on those links, do you mind, the Bitly link does not work on this presentation. And the link that Scott or Chris gave us is a link that I can get to, but I would like to have that link in an email. So if you don't mind, maybe you can send us this presentation with the links in the body of the email so that we can access that. That'd be great.
Sure. Chris, would you work with me for that? Cool. Yep.
Yeah. And Lauren, while we're on this slide, was there a number that just shows flat out households with internet and households without?
Not that I've found. That would be really, really interesting, though. I imagine the best source for that would be actually the internet companies, especially right now where, I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting a lot of knocks on my door trying to keep me in what the internet provider I have is or convert me to another one. So I'd say they probably have that information, but I don't know about that.
Kind of a follow-up on that internet. What I can see in a lot of kind of lower income communities, the only access to internet is through the phone.
Oh.
So when you're looking at the demographic that you were showing, is there like a hierarchy that if you access it with a computer, that means you also access it with a phone, which means you also most likely access it with a tablet? I'd be interested because there is I've found anecdotally and just through working in lower income areas that I'm shocked how high the primary use of internet is, or it's basically solely through use of a cell phone.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I've noticed, and you'll be able to see this later when you look at it, but it seems that higher usage of or higher access by internet also has higher internet access by cell phone, which is really interesting when you think about the implications, because if what we have are like lower socioeconomic groups are more common to access the internet through the phone, but they're also less likely to access internet through the phone overall, then that's revealing in certain ways.
Yeah, I think that's all going to change significantly when 5G launches in a big way. And if you do talk to those internet companies, would you help Frank out and see if he can't get internet with decent speed at his home?
That would be greatly appreciated, Anthony. And I thank you for thinking about me.
I love looking at you, but watching you next to Abe every week's getting a little old.
You know, I'm getting close to his age, so you know it's kind of comforting to have him behind me.
I remember my dad lives in rural Ohio. It was really exciting when there was finally imagery in Google Maps for it. And then shortly after that, they finally moved away from dial-up like 10 years after everybody else. It was pretty exciting. Before that, I didn't even use the internet when I went there. It was so slow.
Lauren, could I ask you a question? It disturbs me to know how much money we spend on buses in this community and how little ridership we have. It's just amazing that if you would go back and look how much money we spend on running the transportation system, and then to have less than a percent of people, what was it? I don't see it in that slide.
2%.
I thought it was less than that, Anthony. But anyway, public transportation, 2%. I'm hoping as we go forward between now and the next comp plan that we'll see that ridership go up, because if these corridors are going to get denser, then it's going to have public transportation is going to have to be part of that answer. And I don't know what it's going to take to get public transportation, but that's a pretty low percentage for the amount of money we spend on it.
Yeah.
That's just my observation.
I agree. Yeah, I think that if I had to speculate, I think that's a logistical thing in a lot of ways, with some of the challenges associated with the way that transit is set up in Lexington. I think Jim may be able to weigh on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I see him. I just can't, all that hair, I have a hard time recognizing.
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, I share your concern about that. And of course, in the moment we're in, that ridership is probably even lower than that, and that's across the country. But I will tell you that LexTran is about to start their comprehensive operational analysis, COA, a robustly funded review of all of their operations, including their routes and including how they deliver their services. So just as you said, Mr. Penn, we're hopeful that this study that they're about to launch will give us some more data and some more input on how public transit can better engage our community. And then certainly along with what we're doing with our corridor studies, can find a way to ensure that public transit is indeed a viable option for transportation.
Thank you, Jim, for that input. And, you know, they're kind of like the drunk on the floor. They only got one way to go, and that's up. It's just, it's amazing to me that you see all these buses and they're running routes, and, you know, I could haul them in my pickup truck cheaper than they can haul them on that bus. But anyway, that's just an editorial comment. Any other questions for Lauren? If not, Lauren, this has been a really educational experience for us. I thank you for putting this together. And I know I speak for the rest of us that any updates that you can have or send our way, we need to learn this type of things. And thank you for presenting it to us today.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. And as you guys look through it, again, feel free to reach out. Data can be really complex, and there are all of those considerations that I mentioned in the beginning that make it even more complicated, but not any less important. What we can learn through demographers and statisticians and economists is more than we can just learn by ourselves. Like, we're stronger together. So just let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it more than I can tell you.